Now we're going to cover the socialist calculation debate. In the early 20th century, free market economists from the Austrian school developed a thorough critique of socialism, arguing that public ownership of industry would be inefficient to the point that it would inevitably cause any socialist experiment to fail. There's two key arguments. There's a knowledge argument and a calculation argument, and these are both intertwined arguments. So the first argument comes from F.A. Hayek's essay, The Use of Knowledge in Society. Hayek argues that decisions within an economy are made by individual actors on the basis of specialized knowledge of the particular circumstances of time and place. The knowledge of the particular circumstances is distributed in the minds of many individuals. It is better to get such and such from this source than from that one because of such and such a reason. This is the kind of knowledge that every individual has some knowledge of. This information cannot possibly be collected and analyzed by any central planning committee. This means that any endeavor to plan a socialist economy will be done in ignorance of facts and information that are necessary in order to plan efficiently. Hayek sees free market capitalism as a decentralized approach to planning. Private ownership and free trade serve as a decentralized distribution mechanism. The economic planning is done locally by private individuals who happen to be privy to the particular circumstances of time and place, and therefore are uniquely in a position to plan efficiently. The other argument, or the other aspect of this argument from the Austrians, comes from Ludwig von Mises's economic calculation in the Socialist Commonwealth. Mises argues that this dispersed knowledge this dispersed knowledge or distributed knowledge of which Hayek spoke is reflected in prices. This allows private individuals to communicate this knowledge to others. Suppose that there are two companies that deliver loads of gravel upon request. Mr. Smith needs gravel to be delivered to his construction site. He can get that gravel from either one of these companies. So he calls and gets an estimate from each. Each company talks to him and gives him an estimate or an estimated cost based on the information he provides them. The first company is 5 miles away, so they charge very little to deliver, but the second company is 30 miles away, so they charge more for delivery. There is a difference reflected in the price for delivery, even though both companies sell the same product at the same price. And when he gets the estimates back, he will see that one is much more expensive, and so he will choose the cheaper one. And the greater difficulty in the cost of transportation is reflected in that price. And this is how that information is communicated to the consumer, even though the consumer may not realize that that's what this information represents. So the price differences signal to the consumer which company they ought to purchase from. Prices communicate information. In a centrally planned economy, where all industry is owned by government, the price mechanism would not work. If you abolish money, as some socialists propose, it is obvious that there would be no pricing mechanism to communicate such information. Even if money as a medium of exchange is preserved, all transfers of goods and services will end up being government-to-government transactions. The market solution to the problem of distributed knowledge can't work when there is a single agent, the government, on both sides of every trade. So Mises contends socialists seriously need to address the question of how to efficiently manage a planned economy. How do you decide how resources should be allocated and how things should be distributed? The objections raised by Hayek and Mises became known as the socialist calculation problem, and socialists have responded to it in various ways. In an essay called Economic Calculation in the Corporate Commonwealth, Kevin Carson, a mutualist libertarian socialist, responded by making several observations. First, he observes that capitalistic managerial firms or corporations are also centrally planned institutions. They are managed from the top down, with decisions being made by people in upper management who are not privy to the specialized knowledge of the particular circumstances of time and place either. Secondly, he observes that corporations under capitalism do actually regularly transfer goods and services internally. A large national company might have an excess of supplies at one factory and decide to move those supplies to another factory. So that calculation problem applies to corporations under capitalism just as much as it would apply to publicly owned industry under socialism. Thus, Carson makes the case that everything which the Austrians use as objections to socialism could just as easily be used as justifications for, or could just as easily be used for objections to existing capitalism. So Carson proposes that Marxian-style central planning by the state and corporate central planning both need to be rejected. His solution is mutualism, a form of cooperativism. You can replace large, overgrown capitalistic corporations with smaller, reasonably sized workers' co-ops. If these co-ops are relatively small and you have worker self-management through a democratic process, it would be much easier to collect the relevant information in order to make informed decisions. Otto Leichter had an approach more in line with traditional Marxism, in contrast to this response from Carson. His response is more in line with traditional Marxism, and he proposes labor time accounting as a possible solution to the calculation problem. You could use labor time as a unit of accounting. And this kind of harks back to the days of early socialism, when social reformers like Robert Owen and Josiah Warren experimented with using labor notes as currency. They had used notes representing a certain number of hours of labor as a form of currency. Then you had Otto Neurath and Amadeo Bordejah, who defended a more full communist approach. They suggested that by tracking productivity and the quality and quantity of resources, it would be possible to do calculation in kind in a moneyless economy. It was suggested that science could help determine what people need, and that this could help us decide how resources ought to be allocated. A thorough study of nutrition and health could help to determine how much of various necessities ought to be produced and how they ought to be distributed. Peter Lawrence argued that people's desires can be communicated via requests for goods and services, so that organizing production in order to satisfy the needs and wants of the community really only requires communication. It is conceivable that this calculation in kind approach will actually become even more feasible as technology becomes more advanced. With the emergence of quantum computing and blockchain technology, it may actually become possible to easily make the complex calculations necessary for such central planning without the requirement of any real effort on the part of humans. Another approach is that of Fred M. Taylor, Abba Lerner, and Oskar Lange. These individuals defend socialism against the Austrian critique by putting forth what is known as the Lange-Lerner model. They put forth a vision of market socialism that preserves the pricing mechanism. Central planners can use the price mechanism to help inform their decisions without letting price alone determine their decisions. The central planners can analyze prices alongside other information in order to make better decisions. Use of prices alone for decision making is what leads to the anarchy of production that causes misallocation of resources that results in overproduction and economic busts. In the Lange-Lerner model, there is a market system. Money is not abolished altogether. However, all enterprise is taken over by the government. The citizens of the nation then become shareholders of said publicly owned enterprises. The profits from those industries are divided up and given to the citizens as a social dividend. Furthermore, Lerner suggests that there is such a thing as the democracy of the marketplace. But he argues that unequal distribution of wealth prevents it from really working adequately. If every dollar is a vote, then dollars need to be distributed in an egalitarian fashion in order for the democracy of the market to really work. So you need a highly progressive tax and redistribution in order to prevent excessive accumulation.